It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter with Ray Fittipaldo, and the Steelers have signed a quarterback, just not one of the ones that everyone was talking about. We'll talk about the impact of Mason Rudolph. We'll also talk about a defensive tackle they signed and a film study on Darius Slay and how he could be an upgrade in man coverage for the Steelers. All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. We are your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of these Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, the show is brought to you by Edgar Steiner and Associates. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the quarterback situation. You wrote about that for Monday morning in the Post-Gazette, talking about how the Steelers are holding their cards close as the quarterback market runs wild. Aaron Rodgers still in the wind. No one knows what he wants to do. Russell Wilson has bounced around from teams. He doesn't have a home yet. But the Steelers did sign Mason Rudolph, so there's at least that. I want to get your thoughts. There are some people in Pittsburgh that think that, you know what, forget about it. Just Mason's the starter. Ray, what's your impact? What's your thoughts or your insights on how Mason Rudolph impacts any of their decisions at quarterback moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, listen, they know they can win games with Mason Rudolph. We saw that play out at the end of the 2023 season when he led them on a 3-game winning streak and got them into the playoffs. And, I thought Mason, except for that interception in the end zone, thought Mason performed pretty well in that playoff game against the Bills as well. So if nothing materializes here with either Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, and honestly, Chris, the longer this goes on, to me it seems like the longer it goes on, it's bad news for the Steelers. That's just my gut feeling. But the Steelers do know that they can win games with Mason Rudolph. Now, could they get to 10 and be a playoff team like they have been? I don't know about that, but I don't think they would fall off the face of the earth and be one of the worst teams in the NFL either.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that, Mason Rudolph will give you a nice floor, like a solid floor. He won't let the bottom come out completely on a team and just completely destroy a game like we've seen, maybe not Steelers quarterbacks, but other quarterbacks do so across the league. And I think that's the thing the Steelers have benefited from. Even when they've had Devlin Hodges, they were able to get just enough from him. And Mason Rudolph at least gives you that because he's given you that for years now. And he went away for 1 year to see if he could show the world that he's a starter. That didn't happen. He came right back. Now he's a backup for the next 2 years, or at least on your roster for the next 2 years so you can figure things out. So I hear people who say, well, just give Mason a chance because that's what he's always wanted. But I think you and I both see, look, Mason, everyone recognizes he's been a great teammate. He's been great in the locker room. They should definitely be happy to have him back. But like you said, if you want to win a little bit more games, you need to get someone else out there. And I'm with you that the longer this Aaron Rodgers situation plays out, the worse it looks. And I'm going to keep making this point. I do not understand why they are waiting for this guy in particular to make this decision at 41, where he hasn't played well. He hasn't been the guy. If this was prime Aaron Rodgers, if this was even 4 years ago Aaron Rodgers, I would have understood because he brings that talent to the table. But I get that Russell Wilson might have been calling hot routes and audibles when you didn't want him to, but he at least knows your system, and he's not going to be sitting on a beach somewhere and while you're worrying if he's going to join your team, nor is he going to skip OTAs and mandatory minicamp like he did for the Jets last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting situation that the Steelers have put themselves in here. I cannot imagine that when they went into this, and if you remember, Chris, a lot of people thought, okay, if it's not Justin Fields, the Steelers are going to turn to Russell Wilson, and that could be done pretty quickly. That never happened. So, they put Aaron Rodgers above Wilson in the pecking order, and apparently they are committed, to waiting this out. They've already waited a week. Today is Monday. We are 1 week into free agency. I think we're pretty much 5 or 6 days into the whole Aaron Rodgers saga, because I think Justin Fields went off the board pretty quickly on last Monday. So, what I wrote about in the Post-Gazette today, it's how teams are kind of valuing quarterbacks. And the Steelers are doing this and the Seahawks are doing this. Listen, the Seahawks had Geno Smith. I think he's a good mid-level quarterback. They were willing to pay him like that Baker Mayfield type of contract, right? That 3-year, $100 million contract.
Yeah.
He said no. He wanted $45 million a year. The Steelers are pretty much doing the same thing. They did not want Justin Fields for $2 and $40 with $30 guaranteed. They did not want Sam Darnold, apparently, who basically got the Baker Mayfield contract, 3 for 100 and change. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think and we're probably going to see a few other teams do this. If you don't have one of those top guys, if you don't have a Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson, I think teams are starting to say, why should we pay $50 million a year to a guy like Geno Smith or a guy like Tua Tagovailoa? Why in the world should we do that and have these guys eat up a lot of salary cap space? So I think, the Seahawks are at the front of this. The Steelers are at the front of this. They're not going to overpay for a quarterback. We're going to see if that's smart. We're going to see if that tanks our 2025 season. But I think at some point this had to happen. Tua doesn't have a playoff win. Justin Herbert doesn't have a playoff win. All these
Trevor
guys
Lawrence.
are making more.
No, Trevor Lawrence has one, I think, right?
Who does?
Trevor Lawrence, because they played. He played Justin Herbert once.
Yeah, Trevor has one, but Herbert doesn't have one. Tua doesn't have one. When's the last time Dak had one? Dak had one a couple of years ago. He's the highest paid guy. He's making $60 million. So, at some point, the quarterback market had to come back down to earth. And I think the Seahawks and the Steelers are two of the first teams that are maybe taking a step back and saying, hey, maybe we don't want to do this. Maybe we're just going to pay what we think we're going to pay, and then we'll find our future franchise guy in the draft at some point.
Yeah, it's almost like the market, the bubble popped, and it's kind of that's what really. But this is also smart, and I think it's good for the Steelers to now be on that side of the curve where they're not overpaying for mid-level quarterback play. If it's Joe Burrow, if it's Josh Allen, if it's Lamar Jackson, if it's Patrick Mahomes, you get it because he's getting you there. But now that I say that, only one of those 4 guys has won a Super Bowl so far. And so it makes you wonder, like, if you need to put together a full roster, maybe that is the key. And maybe that's what the Steelers are trying to do right now while they have that time. And I think that's why the emphasis has not been to just sign whoever's out there for whatever money they want, not pay them whatever they think they're worth. You pay people what you think they're worth in a year where you're not pressed to find the guy. Everyone knows the Steelers aren't Super Bowl contenders right now. And unless Joe Burrow was on the market right now and you could go get him, that would change, I think, everyone's dynamics. But Joe Burrow's not on the market. Granted, seems like nobody from the Bengals office is on the market because they signed both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase to huge extensions. I wonder if they're going to be able to pay anyone on defense moving forward, but that's another issue. But point being, this is we knew this last year when the Steelers signed Russell Wilson and traded and they had to trade away Kenny Pickett and they got Justin Fields. You and I talked about this on this very show, saying like look, the idea is that one of these 2 guys could end up being the bridge guy for next year because everyone knew this upcoming quarterback class was not supposed to be good. And it doesn't mean that 2026 is automatically going to be great. There's hopes that it could be and there's things there, but this could have at least bought you some time. And so now you're in that time period, but you don't have either of those quarterbacks. One signed away, one's still in free agency. And I think that's the situation that the Steelers are acknowledging. Look, we knew this was going to be like this. We knew this was going to be a challenge. It's just now you don't need to become reactionary to being in the moment and then overpay for something you knew you didn't want in the first place.
Yeah, it's almost like you're going to go year to year until you can possibly get that franchise guy. And, Chris, the next quarterback contract to watch is the 49ers and Brock Purdy. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're pretty much gutting their team because they know they have to pay Brock Purdy. So Shanahan knows what he wants in a quarterback. He knows he wants to work with Purdy. But now, can you put a team around Purdy when you're going to have to pay that guy between 45 and $50 million a year? And he's a systems quarterback. I mean, there was a reason he was Mr. Irrelevant. He's not the biggest guy, not the greatest arm, but he fits that system perfectly. So it's going to be interesting to see how the 49ers value him. And would they ever put it to a point where they say, hey, Brock, we're not going to pay you $50 million. So that's the next quarterback contract to watch. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out.
Absolutely. We got to talk about another player the Steelers signs, that Daniel Ekuale, defensive tackle from the Patriots. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates, who also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment is over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's actually the insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, call Edgar Snyder and Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because they'll fight for the workers' comp rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body healthness under one roof. They have group classes for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba and personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and so much more, all for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit is on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront, and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers' newest addition. That's Daniel Ekuale, a 31-year-old free agent defensive tackle, 6'3". Not Milton Williams, not Tershawn Ward, not one of the big names that was out there, but a depth signing. And this is for those who don't know, Ekuale, he was an undrafted free agent who came into the league in 2018 with the Browns, played for the Jaguars, but then he signed with the Patriots, and he played the last 4 years with them. He started all of last season with the Patriots, 16 of the 17 games that they played, and he was able to do some solid work there. Ray, what's your view on how this impacts the defensive tackle plan? Because the Steelers have now cut Larry Ogunjobi and signed Ekuale. Where do you see this group standing right now?
Well, first off, the Steelers are on a never-ending quest here to become the oldest team in the NFL, it seems, especially if Rodgers signs here. Listen, all you got to know about this guy is he's 31 years old, and the first time he ever started an NFL game was last season when he was 30. So, Chris, if this is anything other than a depth signing, then, the Steelers defensive line is going to be in bad shape in 2025. Now, they're likely going to be drafting a defensive lineman early in the draft. That guy is likely to start. So I suppose if Ekuale is your number 4, your number 5, your number 6, they got Montravius Adams coming back. We'll see how he fits in. But as long as he's just a guy who's playing 10 or 15 plays a game, that's fine. The Patriots weren't very good last year. I have no idea why he was starting for them. But again, if he's a starter for the Steelers this season, their run-stopping defense isn't going to be all that much better.
When I looked at his tape, Ray, I saw a solid backup defensive tackle. Like he did a lot of the little things right. And I think that it's the kind of reason that they want to keep around Montravius Adams, because, hey, he's a veteran. He can come in. You can just say, hey, your job is A, B, and C, and he's going to at least give you the NFL standard of what it takes to be in the league. And that's something that I see out of Ekuale. One thing I saw was, he doesn't get a whole bunch. He had 9 pressures all of last season, and I think he only had 1 sack. I think he's only had 1 sack in the last 2 years. But what I saw was when he was working against the run, when teams would double team him, he was very good at using his hands to at least slow down offensive linemen, not let them control him, and be able to make plays on the run. And to me, that's where he can be an asset. But again, like you're saying, on the second line, not the first line of defensive linemen. That's still Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, and maybe the rookie they drafted in the first round this year that we keep talking about. I think that's the look here. This, to me, it might if he's looked at as the replacement for Larry Ogunjobi, that's a problem. But if he's looked at as the replacement for Dean Lowry or Isaiah Loudermilk,
that's fine.
Then I don't think that's as bad.
Yeah, listen, and he does have some versatility. I saw he lined up over the center as a nose. Mm-hmm. He also can line up over the guard and tackle. Pretty much any defensive lineman who's going to be a rotational piece for you has to have that in their toolbox. So at least he has that going for them as well. But listen, Lowry was pretty much the same age last year. They didn't get much out of him. Loudermilk, they really never figured out a way to use him. He's big body, just had the length, had the size. He just was never able to put it together. So if that means they're moving on from him, hey, take a shot at this guy. Like you said, he was a starter last season. Maybe he could be a good piece in your rotation here in 2025.
Maybe. And I think that's the thing here. So to me, I think that there's some people that are like, oh, they signed a defensive tackle, so they don't need to draft one so early. Yes, they do. Yes, they absolutely do. I still think that's something that you and I talked about in the middle of the season, at the end of the season, and we've been talking about it all offseason. The Steelers still should have a priority to draft a defensive tackle in the first round, or if not, trade it back up in the second round and get one of those guys, because this is a good defensive tackle draft where you can find a potential franchise player at that position where they need help at. But again, part of what we talked about was finding a way to boost the depth of their defensive front where they could rotate guys in and out and not lose as much steam, especially when stopping the run. If Equality can bring that, I think that's a fine signing. If he can come off, like you said, give you 15 snaps, make sure that Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton and whoever the rookie is don't get as tired, so that everyone's kind of still going at full speed at the end of the game. That will be the key element there, because I think too many times this past year when those guys had to come off the field because they were just getting worn down, the Steelers didn't have ample defensive linemen behind them who could shut down the run or contain double teams and keep them from getting from the linebackers. And that was a big problem that they need to be able to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Chris, we've talked about it in the past, and I'm sure we'll do it again in the lead up to the draft, but they've been taking these flyers late round, mid to late round, like on guys like Loudermilk, right? Logan Lee last year, right. Guys who maybe you think we can develop, but maybe they just don't have all the tools to become a starting caliber player. This year, the class is loaded. You got to go out and get at least one and maybe two guys who are going to be a big part of your future, because, we just mentioned Ogunjobi, but I feel like every time we talk about the D-line, we have to acknowledge Cam Hayward can't play for either, mm-hmm. right? So, he played great last year. That's great. But eventually you're going to need a guy who's going to take over for him. And I think it would be smart if the Steelers drafted that guy this year. So you have him learn under Cam Hayward, right? Cam did it great. Pass on your knowledge to this guy, and then let that guy run whenever Cam Hayward is done playing. We'll see if they do that. They're not exactly in position now without having a second-round pick to draft two defensive linemen, but if they could do it, I think they should do it, because this is a really talented class, and there are depth players all over the place. Knows 3 techniques and 5 techniques in this.
And that's the key here. Find those guys. Maybe even still double dip, as you're saying. Maybe just wait a little bit longer to double dip in this draft now without a second round pick. Because if you get that answer, it does so much for your defense when you can have those guys, and it could do so much, like you said, just simply being able to learn under Cam Hayward. For all the players on the roster, Cam Hayward is still like the most bona fide leader of the team. He's the face, he's the organization, he's the spirit. He brings all the right kind of things for you. So you want people to learn under him who can carry that kind of energy with them moving forward. Keanu Benton's been learning under him, but can you get someone else to learn under him at defensive tackle? That would be huge, and that's why, again, I think that is a big priority, and that the signing of David Ekuale does not change that formula, at least for us. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about Darius Slay. He talked last week. I did a film study on him that's up now on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll talk about his impact on the Steelers defense next year on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Honda, Moon Township Honda. Go to get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, or at moonhonda.com on their website. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about Darius Slay a little bit here. Now, we got to talk to Darius Slay last Thursday. He came to the Steelers facility along with DK Metcalf, and we wrote about that. But I took some time to analyze some films, particularly from last year, to see what kind of cornerback are the Steelers getting, right? And you and Brian talked about this after the session. This is another one-year rental of a cornerback, and this is the third year in a row they've kind of done this next to Joey Porter Jr. His rookie year, you had Patrick Peterson, well-known. That was not going to last long. Last year was Dante Jackson. Now, there was a chance for Dante Jackson to be a bit longer because he's not 34 or 33 like Patrick Peterson and Darius Slay, but he also was never in, like, both Slay and Peterson have been first-team All-Pro guys at some point in their career. Both are probably going to be Hall of Famers. So, like, there's a different class there. But this is now the third iteration where it's a guy coming in, and most likely he's on a one-year deal. Most likely this is probably it, unless he just shows he has so much more gas in the tank than anyone ever thought. But the thing that I look at this and I see, Ray, is that at least his metrics show that he's a better man coverage cornerback than what they've had in either Peterson or Jackson over the past couple years. Primarily because he is much better at anticipating and knowing how to attack different routes within his coverage.
Yeah, and he talked about that in his news conference last week. He basically said, listen, I might have run pretty well when I came into the league, but the reason I'm still good now is because I'm a film rat, and I'm in that film room every single week during the season looking at tendencies and knowing where I have to be on the football field. So he knows where he's at this stage of his career. The only thing you worry about it, Chris, and it's a one-year signing, so I guess you limit your exposure. But we saw this with Patrick Peterson. You never know when that speed and that athleticism is going to fall off the cliff. And it didn't last year for Slay. For the most part, he was in a circumstance where the Eagles drafted two corners high. They both came on and were starters by the end of the season, so he's not needed there anymore. You just hope that he can do it for one more season at age 34, and that those athletic skills don't betray him. Because if there's one position on the football field, or two positions, it's probably receiver and cornerback, where you need that elite speed and that elite change of direction to be effective. So we'll see if he can do it for another year. $10 million was probably a little bit more than I was expecting, but we'll see how it works out.
No, I agree with that. And I think here's the thing is that, like, to your point, to his point, when he came into the NFL, I believe it was 2013 was when he came into. He ran a 4.38 in the 40-yard dash. Like, that's really fast. That was the fastest cornerback time in the combine back when he ran that 40-yard dash. But like you said, that fades, and what you have to do is you have to develop skills that allow you to make up for your lack of acceleration, your lack of burst, your lack of flat out speed as you get older. And that's something that when you look at his tape, he definitely does. And I showed in this film study, which you can read at Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the post-gazette.com, where I break down several of his plays from last year, where even against top tier guys like Chris Godwin, when he's guarding him, he's able to read their shoulders, their hips, their alignments to kind of tell, hey, this is the direction they're usually going in. I'm going to jump this and make it hard on them to complete this ball. Now, there's also times where his speed does catch up to him, because there's times where he was covering Mike Evans. He had everything kind of down, but then Mike Evans got to the same part of the field that he was. They were kind of at hip, and Mike Evans still got some juice in him, and so he was able to breeze right past him. Same thing for De'Ami Brown with the Commanders on a 51-yard grab he had against Darius Slay. And so Slay is just going to have to be that much more disciplined in not letting people get right by him, because he has to keep the play in front of him to be that playmaker in the secondary for the Steelers.
Yeah, we know the Steelers, and they couldn't do this as much last year with Dante Jackson, because Dante Jackson he doesn't fit the mold of what they want in their corners now. Those big, rangy guys who could play man-to-man. He was more of his own corner. And listen, they made it work for a while. Until he injured his back, he was turning the ball over. He was doing some good things. But the way Teryl Austin and Mike Tomlin want to play, and Slay has a little bit of size to him, so I think he can do that. They want to be able to play man on the outside.
Yeah.
And that's just the way they want to roll. That's why Corey Trice was such an attractive option to them in the 7th round. Even though he had those injuries in college, he was that big 6'2" corner that that they want to get into their program and develop. And another way you could look at this, Chris, it's just buying Corey Trice another year, right? Corey hasn't been able to get on the field because of his injuries. Now you have a veteran in front of him who's going to start. But if Corey Trice can show them that he can be the guy through practices or through opportunities in games when there was injuries, then I think they could just roll with Trice into the future. They just couldn't do that this year just because he's been so injury prone in his first 2 seasons.
Yeah, you got to protect yourself and be prepared for, things like that to happen. And so them getting Slay gives them an experienced guy where, if he goes down because of age, then Corey Trice can go in. But I'm right with you. I think that the Steelers are playing everything very cautiously right now. And I think for good reason. When you don't have all the things in place, you need to be cautious. You need to go out there and you make sure that you're being very responsible with how you handle things. And I think that's what they're doing right now. And granted, you'd like to see some more moves maybe here and there. You'd like to see some more aggression. But I think what they're doing right now is they're surveying the field, waiting for their opportunities. And I'm sure they have their own plans. They have their own targets. But the Steelers are trying to be strategic with how they go after them and how they acquire them to build up their roster and build up everything that they got moving forward.
Yeah, and I think quarterback is definitely playing into that. You when you went into this, Chris, you kind of wanted to know what your fixed number was going to be a quarterback, and then you could throw some other money in other places in free agency. I don't think they were able to do that because they've been in this waiting game. Maybe we'll look back on it next offseason and hopefully they'll have a different plan. But for now, it seems like they've missed out on a lot of their top free agent targets because this quarterback situation, as of Monday morning at least, remains unresolved.
Absolutely. He's Ray Fittipaldo. I'm Chris Carter, and this is the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where we talk Steelers every Monday, Wednesday, Friday here in your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of these Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Post-Gazette. Back here Wednesday with more on the North Shore Drive podcast here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.